your heartbeat, share us round. Now tap that screen, tap it, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it. It's your warm-up routine. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga and Grumps has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says welcome gremlins to the game grotto. Take a seat, grab your daily heart, claim your points and prepare to play.
Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Grumps has entered the grotto. Grumps says it's Sunshine Katie High.
Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says hey Katie, nice to see you.
Gang Gremlins on the scene. Welcome Gremlins to the Game Grotto. Welcome Gremlins to the Game Grotto. Welcoming guys.
Gaga Grumps says welcome gremlins to the game
Grab
grotto.
your heartbeat,
Take a seat,
share
grab your
us
daily
round.
heart,
Now
claim
tap
your
that
points and
screen,
prepare to
tap it,
play.
tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it. It's your warm-up routine. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says press a box up if you need a coin for your daily heart.
Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it. Gang Gremlins come and let's go. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen. Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says who's ready to play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says
Samrat
what
has
letter
entered
will
the
the wheel
grotto.
choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says it's Samrat Haya.
Samrat says at Grumps HII.
Gaga Grumps says hi there Samrat, how goes it? Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. Why? Gaga Grumps says it's almost AV. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts be flying, like a thon. Gremlin
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Holly has entered the grotto. Some faux sense, some faux
Gaga
sense
Grumps
has
says
entered
hey
the
there,
grotto.
Holly.
We would be honored if you would join us.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with Y, please, Grumps.
Holly says hey.
Grumps says yodel.
Gaga Grumps says hey Simfo, welcome back.
Grumps says at Holly hello.
Gaga Grumps says yodel you got.
Grumps says at some faux sense, heya.
Sympho sense says hey, thank you.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart Simfo.
Holly says yodel.
Grumps says treasure box is open. SAFC White Heart has entered the grotto.
SAFC says melon.
Gaga Grumps says a yellow E in need of a home.
Grumps says at SAFC White Heart no OL.
SAFC
PH has
says
entered the
melon.
grotto.
Gaga Grumps says hi SAFC.
PH7 says catch.
SAFC says melon.
Eva has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says no LSAFC.
SAFC says melon.
We would be honored
Gaga
if you
Grumps
would
says
join
catch
us.
fits. Gaga Grumps says hi PH7, nice to see you.
Grumps says at Jimmy welcome back. Jimmy has entered the grotto.
PH7 says hello.
Grumps says at PH7 heya.
PH7 says live.
Jimmy says hello, nice to see yous.
SAFC says Neth.
SAFC says neither. Gaga Grumps says thanks for following Holly.
PH7 says tithe.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart PH7. Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart Jimmy.
Asia has entered
SAFC
the
says
grotto.
Neff. SAFC says Neff.
Asia says tithe.
PH7 says a tithe.
SAFC says knave.
OF Hipjaw has entered the grotto.
Asia says tithe. Gaga Grumps says nether isn't a word.
OF Hipjaw says Rocky cool. Grumps says at Eva welcome back.
Gaga Grumps says tithe fits.
Grumps says no E in second.
Safk says party.
SAFC says party.
Gaga Grumps says we end in the.
Asia says bathe.
PH7 says bathe.
Gaga Grumps says needs an E at the end SAFC. Gaga Grumps says bather work D.
It's playtime!
SAFC says bathe.
Don't let her lose! Grumps is on the buttons!
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Let those stickers fly! Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready?
J. CBNN has entered the grotto.
Gremlins, let's go! Gremlins, let's go! Team Gaga, Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps,
Gaga Grumps says Beaver for Gaga. Share the LIVE, chat the chat and shower her with roses and GGs.
game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go! Game! Gremlins, let's go!
SAFC says do the second one. Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says the second one. Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. K. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard resetting.
Ryan Winter has entered the grotto.
Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Ryan Winter 64 says Kinda.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be
Gaga Grumps says hi Ryan.
Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts beat flying, like a thon. Gremlins
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Lights the fire,
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with K, please some foe.
Symphosense says kited.
SAFC says Kates.
Millar has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says kitted you got.
MILAA says at Eva you're not at the top of the board.
TH7 says tempo. MILAA says that Eva was only saying BTW.
Gaga Grumps says yellow T and E in need of new homes.
SAFC says trend.
Gaga Grumps says hey Millar, nice to see you.
MILAA says at Eva, just saying.
Gaga Grumps says tempo fits. Gaga Grumps says no change.
Mala says earth.
TH7 says saute.
Symphosense says brute.
Gaga Grumps says earth fits. Gaga Grumps says still no change.
Symphosense says flute.
Symphosense says no panvium.
Gaga Grumps says yep T in wrong place.
PH7 says quest.
Symphosense says at PH7 nice.
Gaga Grumps says quest fits. Gaga Grumps says we added a homeless S.
PH7 says style.
Mala says style.
Gaga Grumps says style works. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Will the fireworks fly? A random star chosen by fate. Play a part, it's a live date. Wordle with Gaga. Wordle with Gaga. Ra-da-da. Wordle with Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says, can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
Get it in three. It's do or die. Only in three. A pretty sky. A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says, grab your daily heart while I set up the next ball. Gaga Grumps says,
Oliver
"We're ready to play
ARTZZ has
Wordle."
entered the grotto.
Oliver Arts says audio.
Oliver Arts says me.
Gaga Grumps says, what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says at Oliver_ARTZZ, welcome back.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. F. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Oliver Arts says Phil's.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon.
Gaga Grumps says, I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Gremlins define. Lights the fire. Lights the fire. Lights the fire.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with F, please, Oliver.
Oliver Arts says Phil's.
Gaga Grumps says, is it still Phil's?
Fizzy Condicio has entered the grotto.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says faced. Gaga Grumps says Phil's you got. Oliver Arts says yes, sir. Gaga grumps, says Fizzy in the house.
It's a Wordle wipeout.
Fizzy can die CO1 says hi.
No letters to shout. Wipeout.
Gaga grumps, says Wipeouts in the chat.
Lost in the grid, can't figure it
Pitsy Conditio 1 says Ether.
Oliver Art says, oh.
Oh no. Wipeout.
Grump says at Fizzy Candy Q1 heya.
Oliver Art says pound.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says hi.
Gaga grumps, says Pound Fits.
PH7 says Tangu.
Gaga grumps, says a yellow N in need of a home. Gaga grumps, says Tangy Fits.
Oliver Art says maybe it ends with an N.
Busbot Romalmo has entered the
Oliver
grotto.
Art says, oh, maybe not.
PH7 says Tench.
Keaton has entered the
Keaton
grotto.
says Tench.
Gaga grumps, says N lives at number 3. AT moved into number 1.
Default Walt has entered the grotto.
Default World says Tenet.
Gaga grumps, says Keaton in the chat. Gaga grumps, says Tench Fits.
Keaton says, hey, hey.
Default World says hi.
Symphozen Symphosen says 10th.
Gaga grumps, says so near and yet so far.
Oliver Art says yeah, it's 10th.
Welcome, Gremlin, to the game grotto. Welcome,
Gaga grumps, says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
guys. Settle down. Grab your heartbeat. Share us round. Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it. Tap that screen. Yeah, tap it, tap it. It's your warm-up routine. Gang Gremlins on the scene. 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 Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it. Tap that screen. Yeah, tap it, tap it. Gang Gremlins
T has entered the grotto.
now tap that screen. Tap it, tap it. Tap that screen. Yeah, tap it, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Gang Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Gaga grumps, says treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart.
Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says at T high. Grumps says YOY.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. Y again. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon, tap and don't stop, like a thon, who will be crowned like a thon, gremlin renowned like a thon, fingers on fire like a thon, gremlins don't tire like a thon.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Gremlins define. Lights the fire, lights the fire, lights the fire.
Grumps says treasure box is open.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with Y busbotter. Gaga Grumps says young you got. Gaga Grumps says a yellow G in need of a new home.
Grumps has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Default Walt has entered the grotto. Grumps says treasure box is open.
Default Walt says lager.
Gaga and Grumps has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says sorry, had to restart Tickfinity. Gaga Grumps says lager fits. Gaga Grumps says G lives at number 3, E moved in next door.
Default Walt says Baguette.
Gaga Grumps says Baguette works.
Fireworks for Gaga. It's a performance in it. Explode 'em on her face.
Gaga Grumps says Wordle
Some faux
3.
sense, some
Let's
faux
see
sense
those
has
fireworks.
entered the grotto.
Gifts and emojis will explode on Gaga's face.
Explode with glee. Fireworks for Gaga. Emojis make her happy. As in her face they slappy. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. From a single rose to a whole bouquet. Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smileys in chat still win the day. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat. Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Fizzy Condicio has entered the grotto. Fizzy Condicio has entered the grotto.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says at Grumps you love a Q.
Grumps says at Fizzy Candy Q1 if only it came up more often.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. H.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says Hinge.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon?
Lucas has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance. Gaga Grumps says it's all acting a bit strange today.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says FR.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with H please Grumps.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says hinge.
Grumps says house.
Gaga Grumps says house you got.
It's a Wordle wipeout. No letters to shout.
Gaga Grumps says wipeout.
Edits has entered the grotto.
Edits 33 says brick.
Edits 33 says brick.
Grumps says well done me, killed off 3 vowels in one go.
Gaga Grumps says brick fits.
EVIEE White Heart has entered the grotto.
Edits 33 says it could be rally.
Gaga Grumps says a yellow R in need of a new home.
Hi there has entered the grotto.
Heather 105 says party.
Gaga Grumps says hi there, hi there.
Heather 105 says hello.
Heather 105 says party.
Gaga Grumps says could still be party.
Symphozen Sympho Sense as party still fits.
It's playtime! Gaga is in the
Hi there,
box.
105 says yeah.
Don't let her lose! Grumps is on the buttons!
Gaga Grumps says GG
Let him
Gremlins.
push yours.
Let's see those
Are you
W's in
ready
the
to
chat.
play? Let those stickers fly! Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready? Team Grumps, are you steady? Game Gremlins, let's go! Game Gremlins, let's go! Team Gaga, 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 Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you here? Team Gaga, are you ready?
Gaga Grumps says do the Gaga. Share the LIVE, chat the chat and shower her with roses and GGs.
Let's go! Game Gremlins, let's go! Game Gremlins, let's go!
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next one.
Let's go!
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says ether.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. E. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon, tap and don't stop, like a thon, who will be crowned like a thon, gremlin renowned like a thon, fingers on fire like a thon, gremlins don't tire like a thon, hearts be flying like a thon.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Wills has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for the roses, Lizzie.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says NP.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says I only had 3 coins lol.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with E please Grumps.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says allude.
Gaga Grumps says and you gave them all to me XXX.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says allude.
Gaga Grumps says if your word is being filtered try, I'd like word.
I has entered the
Grumps
grotto.
says
Enter I say.
Gaga Grumps says enter you got.
Ball says entry. Ball says train.
Gaga Grumps says yellow T and R in need of homes.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says tract.
Gaga Grumps says no N for train.
Ball says train.
Gaga Grumps says tract fits. Gaga Grumps says no N bolle.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says holy.
Gaga Grumps says T and alive at 3 and %C and R are homeless. Gaga Grumps says holy indeed. Gaga Grumps says there's your pattern. Bolle says chart. Gaga Grumps says chart fits.
Fireworks for Gaga.
Bolle says we're who.
It's a performance and explode 'em on her face. She's in a happy place. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says Wordle in 3. Let's see those fireworks. Gifts and emojis will explode on Gaga's face.
Emojis make her happy, as in her face they slappy. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
James has entered the grotto.
Single rose to a whole bouquet. Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay. Smileys in chat still win the day.
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says Q now.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says, so closed TJ.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. T. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says theta.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with T please, James.
James says today.
Gaga Grumps says today you got. Gaga Grumps says yellow OD and are in need of homes.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says demon.
James says a door.
Gaga Grumps says
Trina has
Nitane
entered the
Izzy.
grotto.
Trina says hello.
Goucher has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says a door fits. Gaga Grumps says hey Trina, nice to see you.
Trina says NU.
CLXCEVRR has entered the grotto.
AO and E are homes. D lives at number 4.
James says anode.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says abode.
Cooksever says Alland.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says abode.
Gaga Grumps says 2 options 4 guesses. Gaga Grumps says anode first.
Goucher says noble as filler.
Fireworks for Gaga. It's summer for Miss Amy. Explode 'em on her face. She's in a happy place. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says Wordle in 3. Let's see those fireworks. Gifts and emojis will explode on Gaga's face.
Emojis make her happy.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says GG Epic.
Fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga. From a single rose to a whole bouquet. Anything will be okay. If you can, that's okay.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says congrats, congrats, congrats.
Fireworks for Gaga, fireworks for Gaga. Fireworks for Gaga.
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat. Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says Q, absolutely.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says wafer.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A, W. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts beat.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Busy Candicio 1 says, I remember when I got a hard one right, and the answer was ethos or ether.
Gaga Grumps says wasn't it yesterday?
Fitzy Condicio 1 says ick.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says wafer.
Gaga Grumps says lol me either. Gaga Grumps says your word starting with W Trina.
Grumps says at Trina you with the turbo fingers.
Trina says watch please.
Gaga Grumps says what you got.
Trina says at Grumps it was a competition for sure.
Gaga Grumps
DARCIE has entered the grotto.
Darky says Piper.
Darky says Piker.
Gaga Grumps says hi Darcy.
Grumps says at Trina, not really. I saw you disappear in the far distance.
Darky says Piker.
Darky says hi.
Gaga Grumps says Piker fits.
Fizzy Condicio1 says what should be the answer.
Grumps says at Darcie Heya.
Gaga Grumps says P lives at number 1 Wordle Street. 9 letters wiped from the board. Fizzy Condicio1 says Polly.
James says plum.
Gaga Grumps says plum fits.
Fitzy Condicio1 says Polly.
Gaga Grumps says what should be Polly now.
Fitzy Condicio1 says it's probably not gonna.
Gaga Grumps says close.
Trina says polyp.
Gaga Grumps says polyp is what I see. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
A random star chosen by fate. Play your part, it's a live date. A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with
Gaga Grumps says can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results.
Elwis Godwin has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next board.
a pretty sky. A Wordle with Gaga. A Wordle with Gaga. Da da da. A Wordle with Gaga.
Fitzy Condicio1 says imagine, we get it first try.
Shireen Curley has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle.
Shireen Curley says hello.
Gaga Grumps says one day I will lol. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Grumps says it. Shireen Curly welcome.
Gaga Grumps says hey Shireen, welcome back.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says at SHAREN curly hair.
Shireen Curly says that Fizzy Candiku 1 hey ya.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says hi.
Libs has entered the grotto.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says the wheel was lagging so bad what?
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. P didn't think the wheel was ever going to stop.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says plume.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
L3WAS Godwin says I guess we would do P.
Has entered
Trina
the grotto.
says L3WAS _Godwin great guess.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says law.
L3WAS Godwin says that Trina Banks.
I said peach.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says congrats.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says plume.
NUFC Life has entered the grotto.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says I would like prude.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with P please Trina. Gaga Grumps says NUFC in the house.
Trina says Lewis to choose please as they got the letter right.
Gaga Grumps says your word Lewis.
Trina says if not then peach.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says prude maybe.
Gaga Grumps says let's go peach lol. Gaga Grumps says wipeouts in the chat.
Has entered the
Empty
grotto.
Sinbrick says none.
Fizzy Candicio 1 says Union.
James says stunk.
Fizzy Candicio 1 says I would like Union.
Gaga Grumps says Union fits.
Shireen Curly says blood.
Gaga Grumps says O lives at number 4 Wordle Street.
James says Bloom.
Gaga Grumps says blood fits.
Minnie has entered the grotto.
Minnie 16 says Bloom.
Gaga Grumps says close.
Millar has entered the grotto.
Shireen Curly says broom.
Trina says broom.
Mala says broom.
Minnie 16 says broom.
Trina says or brook.
Gaga Grumps says broom is in the grid.
Millar says brook.
Minnie 16 says Brook.
Gaga Grumps says yep, only option I see.
Welcome, Gremlins, to the game grotto. Welcome, Gremlins, to the game grotto.
Welcome in, guys. Settle down. Grab your heart.
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Tap that screen, yeah, tap it. It's your warm-up routine. Game Gremlins on the scene.
Trina says at Grumps, do you go live also?
Game Gremlins on the scene. Game Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says welcome Gremlins to the game grotto. Take a seat, grab your daily heart, claim your points and prepare to play.
Now tap that screen. Tap it, tap that screen. Yeah, tap it. Let's see those team stickers flow. Game Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Grumps says at Trina infrequently. I scream when in playing on the PS5.
Now tap that screen. Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next board. Gaga Grumps says trying to get a treasure box up for you lol.
Trina says it Grumps okay.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says oh tie. Trina says, I will put one up.
Gaga Grumps says finally treasure box up if you need a coin for your daily heart. Gaga Grumps says everything is so lagged. Gaga Grumps says okay, let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says Grumps love his Q bra.
Grumps says at Fizzy Candy Q1 and it will come around.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. Z.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says at G. RUMPS maybe in like 3 rounds.
Busbot Romelmo has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Shireen Curly says zebra.
Race to the top like a thon. Tap and don't stop like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned like a thon. Fingers on
Grumps says at Fizzy Candy Q1 you jinxing me.
Gremlins don't tire like a thon. Hearts beat flying like a thon.
Jay has
Gaga
entered the
Grumps
grotto.
says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Fizzy Candicio 1 says at Grumps nah.
Gaga Grumps says shy in the house.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says Oda.
Cheers says evening.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says Zimic.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with Z, please, Busbotter.
Grumps says at Fizzy Candy Q1 I believe you, totally.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart shy. Fizzy Condicio1 says I would like Zymic. Gaga Grumps says zebra you got. Gaga Grumps says Zymic is a very Wordle word. Gaga Grumps says a yellow bee in need of a home.
Shireen Curly says boots.
Grumps says bingo.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says blunt.
Gaga Grumps says no plurals.
Fizzy Candicio 1 says blunt.
Gaga Grumps says bingo fits. Gaga Grumps says thanks for sending a treasure box, Trina.
Grumps says treasure box is open.
Gaga Grumps says B lives at number 1 Wordle Street.
Trina says you're welcome.
Trina says blush.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says bulky.
Gaga Grumps says blush fits.
Lyle Murdoch has entered the grotto.
Murdoch 5 says block.
Malachi P. Pod has entered the
Condicio
grotto.
1 says bulky.
Malachi says hey.
Gaga Grumps says yellow L and U in need of homes.
Grumps says at Lyle Murdoch 590. Debbie Van Pra has entered the grotto. Grumps says at Malachi P. Pod hello there.
Gaga Grumps says bulky fits.
Debbie Van Prague says bulky.
SBNR has entered the grotto.
SP3N6R283 says bully.
Gaga Grumps says
MutiG
so
has
near
entered
and
the
yet so
grotto.
far.
Shireen Curly says bolt.
Grumps says treasure box is open.
MEWTG says bulgy.
Shireen Curly says bully.
Gaga Grumps says no G for bulgy. Gaga Grumps says bully is in the grid.
It's playtime! Gaga is in the box! Don't let her lose! Grumps is on the buttons! Don't let him push you!
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat. Gaga Grumps says Dooba Dooba Gaga. Share the LIVE, chat the chat and shower her with roses and GGs. SP3N60 283 says yes. Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up the next ball.
Grumps says at SP3N60283 and please be reviewed too.
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle. Gaga Grumps says thanks for doing your daily heart, Shireen. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Shireen Curley says you're welcome. Gaga Grumps says Jesus we are starting with A. K.
Grumps says Wheel really loves dragging things out today.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Trina says at Gaga and Grumps.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned, like a thon. Fingers on fire, like a thon. Gremlins don't tire, like a thon. Hearts beat flying, like a thon. Gremlins defying.
Gaga Grumps says I've given you the beat, now let's see your fingers dance.
Harvey has entered the grotto.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says kanji.
Carly has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with K, please, Shireen.
Carly says cocky.
Gaga Grumps says Carly in the house.
Shireen Curly says koala. Carly says cocky.
Gaga Grumps says koala you got.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says kanji.
Samrat has entered the grotto.
Grumps
Says it. Carly, welcome back.
Malachi says lousy.
Gaga Grumps says O lives at number 2. L needs a new home.
Carly says polar.
Carly says polar.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says coals.
Carly says polar. Gaga Grumps says lousy fits.
Carly says I said it first.
Carly says polar.
Trina says lover.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says loner.
Carly says I told you polar was better.
Samrat says Lewis.
Carly says I
Kyara
said
less than
polar
has entered
first.
the grotto.
Malachi says lodge.
Samrat says loved.
Kiara 3 says lover.
Samrat says loved.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says loner.
Samrit says loved.
Kiara 3 says lover.
Gaga Grumps says I don't always go on fi.
Samrat says loved.
Carly says, why did you not do polar?
Fitzy Condicio 1 says loner.
Carly says enraging.
Samrat says Carly, it's her choice, so be it.
Gaga Grumps says because I didn't see it. Gaga Grumps says then rage away.
Samrat says at Gaga and Grumps, yes, Gaga, insane comeback.
Trina says Carly, it's just a game. We're here to play and enjoy our time here.
Carly says ugh, and leaving this crap live.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says lover.
Samrat says at Carly it's not crap, and just leave anyways.
Shireen Curly says good riddance, Carly.
Gaga Grumps says lover then. Lol.
Samrat says yes, lol.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says wait, I don't see Carly's text anymore.
Kiara 3 says either lover or lower.
Shireen Curly says yes, lol.
Fitzy Condicio 1 says bro really got fed or rage.
Gaga Grumps says lover and leave her.
Trina says, oh my god, I said lover first. How could you not try that first, Gaga?
Gaga Grumps says the song says Grumps is on the buttons and don't make him push yours.
Kiara 3 says lover.
Grumps says it. Trina, oh, behave.
Gaga Grumps says Trina.
Shireen Curley says that Trina loved this comment.
It's playtime! Gaga is in the box! Don't let her lose!
Trina says sorry, I'm on the naughty step.
Don't let him push yours! Are you ready to play? Let those stickers fly! Which team are you on? Team Gaga, give a cheer. Team Grumps, are you ready?
Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Gremlins, let's go!
Grumps says it. Trina.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says, why is this live lagging so bad?
Trina says bear hug to get me off this damn step, please.
Gaga Grumps says it's terrible.
Grumps says it. Fizzy Candy Q1, not just you.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says at GRUMPSKK.
Gaga Grumps says grab you daily heart while I set up the next board.
Grumps says at Trina, you'll have to bring cake to the next live.
Gaga Grumps says let's play Wordle.
Trina says at Grumps, I do enjoy baking, so you'll get the pigeons to bring it over.
Gaga Grumps says gonna try disabling some of the add-ons, see if that helps.
Grumps says cue me, darling.
Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Trina says there's a few slices for now.
Grumps says at Trina, just email it. Grumps says it Trina.
Kiara 3 says water.
Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. W.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says wafer.
Kiara 3 says water.
Trina says that Grumps looks delicious.
Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the
PH has
song
entered the
chooses
grotto.
the first word.
Like a thong, race to the top, like a thon. Tap and don't stop, like a thon. Who will be crowned like a thon? Gremlin renowned like a thon. Fingers on fire like a thon. Gremlins don't tire like a thon. Hearts beat flying like a thon. Gremlins defying.
Grumps says it Trina in the cheesecake man, if that helps with your baking at all.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says wafer.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with W. Kiara.
Kiara 3 says water.
Gaga Grumps says water you got.
PH 7 says chest.
Gaga Grumps says yellow T and E in need of homes. Gaga Grumps says chest fits.
Trina says it Grumps with white chocolate in the mix, yes. I've never attempted a baked one.
Gaga Grumps says no change.
Shireen Curly says teeth.
Gaga Grumps says no E in 3.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says tempo.
Trina says tepid.
Gaga Grumps says tempo fits.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says WHAT.
Trina says nice.
Gaga Grumps says anagram time.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says empty.
PH 7 says empty.
Kiara 3 says empty.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says empty.
Gaga Grumps says that's what I see, yes.
Grumps says that Trina absolutely loved them. I had a recipe with apples and lost it many years ago.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says GG me.
Welcoming guys, settle down.
Grumps says it Christina Hale.
Grab your heartbeat, share us round. Now tap that screen, tap it, tap it, tap that
Gaga
screen.
Grumps
yeah,
says
tap it, tap
GG
it. It's
Gremlins.
your warm
Let's see those W's in the chat.
Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Fizzy Condicio 1 says, congrats, congrats, congrats.
Gang Gremlins on the scene.
Gaga Grumps says GG's to Fizzy.
Now tap that screen, tap it, tap that screen, yeah, tap it. Gang Gremlins coming, let's go. Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says, can you beat me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.
Gang Gremlins on the scene. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen. Now tap that screen.
Gaga Grumps says grab your daily heart while I set up
Gang
the next
Gremlins
ball.
on the scene.
Trina says at Grumps, I love how this has gone to a Word Live, Rage Live, to a Gordon Ramsay channel, love it.
Sunshine Katie has entered the grotto.
Gaga Grumps says let's play the last Wordle of the day. Gaga Grumps says I like how we're building a community. Gaga Grumps says what letter will the wheel choose? Predictions in the chat now.
Trina says, I thought we had an extra 10 to play today because of how lovely we are.
Gaga Grumps says unfortunately my care schedule doesn't really give UCH leeway ad hoc. Gaga Grumps says we are starting with A. C. Gaga Grumps says leaderboard reset incoming. Tap those screens. The one wearing the crown at the end of the song chooses the first word.
Fitzy Conditio 1 says Cajun.
tapping don't stop like a thorn. Who will be crowned like a thorn?
Trina says that Gaga and Grumps it was worth a try. I'll get on with my baking instead for Grumps.
Gaga Grumps says he will be your biggest FSM.
Fitzicondicio once says Cajun.
Gaga Grumps says your word starting with C, please, Shireen.
Shireen Curly says champ.
Gaga Grumps says champ you got. Gaga Grumps says a yellow H in need of a home.
Trina says broth.
Gaga Grumps says broth fits. Gaga Grumps says we added a homeless O.
Trina says Holly.
Shireen Curly says house.
Trina says house.
Gaga Grumps says Holly fits.
Shireen Curly says hello.
Trina says hello. Gaga Grumps says this is quite apt for the goodbye game.
Fitzicondicio once says hello.
Trina says at Gaga and Grumps. Gaga Grumps says GG Gremlins. Let's see those W's in the chat.
Trina says my sign of 10 extra games came through.
Gaga Grumps says thanks for joining me to play Wordle. I will be back at 4 p.m. UK tomorrow for more Wordle with Gaga.
Trina says thank you for the live.
Gaga Grumps says it did.
Grump says at Trina nothing better than a bit of variety. Big DOYB Levitate Agency
Gaga
CEO
Grumps
has
says,
entered
can
the
you meet
grotto.
me at Wordle? Check out my daily posts and share your results with me.